Well, not to be depressing, but here's the truth and something you should keep in mind over the next few years. The United States, two things to keep in mind. The United States is moving, not inexorably, but still moving toward civil war, number one. And number two, civil wars are the very worst kind of wars, worse than any kind of war fought against a foreign adversary. So to number one, why is America moving toward civil war? For the same reason all countries that wind up in civil war get there, because the differences between their population, between people within their borders, becomes too great to bear. People decide, I have nothing in common with the people who live near me, and I don't want to live near them anymore. In other words, diversity, difference, is actually intolerable to most people. Not necessarily racial diversity, though sometimes that too, but diversity of all kinds. It is not our strength. In fact, it is, without question, our weakness, and it has always been. If you have nothing in common with your wife, do you have a stronger marriage? No, of course your marriage falls apart, and the same is true for countries. And the truth about the United States is that on every level, beginning with a demographic level, the American population has less in common with itself, with one another, than ever before. When I was born, which wasn't that long ago, it was the modern era. It was air travel and air conditioning, electricity. When I was born, the United States was about 90% white Christian. It's now less than 40% white Christian. Now, you may think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a massive change, an unprecedented change, really, in a very short period of time. And of course, it's not accidental or organic. That was the result of policies put in place to achieve that result, and they did. There are people who didn't want a majority white Christian country. Okay, they got what they wanted, but what do they have? They have a country with no majority demographically at all. There is no American majority, which is to say 51% of people who have something very basic in common. And so what you have is an inherently fractured country. Languages, religions, ethnicities, backgrounds, beliefs, too innumerable to catalog. And so a country like that, unless unified by something, will split apart, particularly when that country is the size of a continent and is held together by a pretty fragile web of infrastructure, air routes and highways. And so unless you are very self-conscious about keeping it together physically, but also spiritually, explaining to people why they should have any regard at all, much less any obligation to people in, say, the next town, much less the next state, unless you do that self-consciously, unless you inculcate a sense of national identity, it will by nature fall apart. That is a physics principle, entropy. It'll blow up unless you hold it together. And this has been an untended garden for decades. Decades. Nobody in charge of the United States over the past, say, 40 years has really tried to articulate why all of us should live together on the same continent. There's kind of been an unspoken ethos of America, a kind of gay rights technocracy, globo homo. We're all kind of cool with, lifestyles. But that's thin gruel in the end. It's also repulsive. But even if you like it, it's not enough to hold people together who don't have common beliefs, backgrounds, languages, religions. It's just not. It's pathetic. It's rich people politics. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's just an adornment. It's political jewelry. It's a bumper sticker. It's not a national identity, and it's not enough to hold your country together. And that's why ours is coming apart, because people don't have enough in common. So what would happen if it came apart? What would happen if there were a civil war? Well, the first thing to know is it would be incredibly violent, because wars are by nature violent, and civil wars especially so. Violent and crazy. And you do hear from time to time people on both sides, particularly on the left, but not only on the left, say, well, I'm just sick of it. I'm just sick of it. I'm ready for the fight. People who say that have never seen what that looks like. Anyone who has seen what that looks like approaches the entire topic with care and respect, because it's incredibly ugly and its effects are generational. And if you don't believe it, consider our own Civil War, which ended 160 years ago in 1865, and we're still fighting it. We're still arguing over the names of Confederate generals, tearing down their statues, renaming military bases, stereotyping people in the South. That war is still ongoing on some level. It's not a hot war, but it's very much a Cold War and has been for 160 years. Go to Spain. Their civil war ended in, 1939. They're still arguing about it. They're still passing legislation about it. The wounds left by civil wars do not heal quickly. They last for, hundreds of years, and they completely remake the country, usually for the worse. So disunity is easy. Rebuilding into a single country after a civil war is very, very hard, and sometimes it never even works. There are civil wars in effect ongoing on this planet right now for hundreds of years, and they probably will never be resolved because the people fighting each other within national borders don't have anything in common. That's the truth. So if you want to prevent a civil war, figure out what everybody, or at least the bulk of the people in your nation, have in common and emphasize that. And so what would that be in our case? Hard to know. In fact, at this stage, really the only realistic hope for national unity is spiritual revival, is a place where most Americans wake up to realize that God exists and created every single person in the United States of America. And that's what we have in common, our humanity. Not because our common humanity is meaningful by itself, but because our common humanity comes from God and we're created in his image. And only when people truly realize that will they hesitate before killing each other. But in the meantime, and we hope that comes soon, but in the meantime, there is a step that the government at all levels, federal, state, and local, can take to restore at least a sense of calm in the midst of rising chaos. And if you can't smell that right now, then you obviously have long COVID, because it is redolent. This country is on the brink. And in fact, you saw the normal dummies today on social media taking pictures from Portland, Oregon. Everything is fine here in Portland. They're liars. Or they're intentionally blind to the reality right in front of them, which is the country is degrading, and you can tell by its cities. They are falling apart. There's no country in the world with as many ugly, dangerous, dysfunctional, dirty cities as we have. It's painful to say that as someone who was born and has always lived here and plans to always live here. But that's a fact. And as someone who travels a lot, I can affirm what you already know. Our cities are dying. And when your cities die, your country dies. And a lot of people don't want to believe this because they move to rural areas and are hoping to just sort of ignore it. I'd be in that category. But it's nevertheless true. When your cities die, your country dies. And our cities are dying the kind of death that can't be permanent. They're dying the death born of chaos, where things just get so crazy and people literally die on the street, also have sex and defecate on the street, but die on the street. And that's intolerable. Chaos is intolerable. People can't handle it. So out of chaos comes what? Democracy? Spontaneous order? No. Imposed order. Dictatorship. Of course, each and every time. That's what happens out of chaos. People beg for a strong man. There's always someone willing to oblige, and that's exactly what they get. And that's exactly what we're going to get unless some kind of order is restored, which is another way of saying restoring order is not a step toward totalitarianism. It may be the only way to prevent it, but we need to do it now. Walk through any American city and be honest with yourself. Is this working? It's clearly getting worse. What will it look like in 10 years? The differences between states are getting more profound. You wouldn't expect that, actually. After the advent of radio and then television, the internet, mass media, the idea was, well, regional differences are going away because all of us are united by the media we consume. And that's no longer true. And in fact, our media are exacerbating the differences or highlighting them anyway. And so a place like South Florida is more different from South California than it's ever been. And extrapolate forward 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. Will it be possible to drive from South Florida to Southern California? Well, of course it will. It's America. Really? Is it possible to drive from Sao Paulo, Brazil to Rio? Not really, because it's too dangerous, because it's too chaotic. And Brazil, by the way, is not a third world country. Brazil is a real country about the size of the United States, with a highly educated, impressive population, amazing natural resources, a lot going for it. And yet that country, through successive governments, has been unable to restore order to its highways. So that's the rule globally. That's the state of nature globally. And that could very easily happen here. And we've been moving in that direction for decades. We sit, those of us on the East Coast, and look over at the West Coast, my home state of California, and watch its politicians declare boycotts against this or that American state. Or say in public, I'm not going to follow this federal law. The federal government has no dominion here. And we all sort of laugh, oh, they're so crazy. Each one of those actions is a form of insurrection. In fact, every bit as profound as anything that happened in Fort Sumter in 1861, the battle that kicked off the Civil War, the deadliest war in American history, the one from which we're still recovering. Those are acts of insurrection. Either you have a federal government with power over the states, or you don't. Either federal laws apply to all 50 states, or they don't. And for decades, some states have opted out of federal law, and the rest of the states have just sort of laughed at them or tried to ignore it. Oh, marijuana is illegal? Well, we're going to have marijuana anyway. Oregon decriminalized fentanyl and meth 5 years ago. If ever there was a time to send federal troops into Oregon, it was when Oregon did that, thereby killing thousands and thousands and thousands of its citizens and also ignoring federal law. Those are illegal narcotics. We blow up boats full of those things. But the state of Oregon decided unilaterally, well, we're just going to effectively legalize them. And lots of states have done that, and the feds have done nothing. But now, because the issue is immigration, which is a core issue, the federal government is doing something. President Trump has announced he is sending federal troops to the state of Oregon and to the city of Chicago. He's not yet sent federal troops to Oregon. There's a court fight that's way too complex and not that interesting to explain at the moment. Look it up. That has prevented that. But National Guardsmen have arrived, mostly from Texas, in the state of Illinois, in Chicago, to force, the president says, that city to allow ICE, the Immigration Service, federal immigration officers, to do their job, to deport people who are breaking federal law, illegal aliens. And the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois have said multiple times, we do not follow federal immigration law in the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. So the president is forcing this issue. They're in violation of the law. He says he's working to uphold the law. Here is the response of J.B. Pritzker, who is the longtime, 6 years now, I think, governor of Chicago, to the president's deployment of National Guard's troops to Illinois. Watch.
What I know is in the early days of the Nazi regime, they started slowly but surely taking away people's rights. And what we're seeing now is the very same thing. They've gone into cities now with the military. Think about that. In your lifetime, have you ever seen anything like that, where the President of the United States is sending military or troops dressed as military, ICE and CBP, in camouflage with automatic weapons into our major cities? It's wrong.
He's such a buffoon. So demented is the Democratic Party. That guy thinks he's going to be president. Have you ever seen this before? In American history, has there ever been a single instance of some Nazi in the White House sending troops into a state to uphold federal? It's never happened before. It's never happened before, except it's happened like a million times. And it's been celebrated almost every single time, beginning at least in September of 1957, 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down from the Supreme Court banning segregation in public schools in the United States. And in the state of Arkansas, in the capital city, Little Rock, Central High School, a high school, was not following this Supreme Court decision. And so Dwight David Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, commander of American troops in Europe during World War II, the president of the United States, sent the 101st Airborne to Central High School. The 101st Airborne, not like 300 fat guardsmen from San Antonio, but the 101st Airborne with M1s to a high school. And then he left his vacation and he went on television to explain why he did it. And remarkably, thanks to the internet, we have the tape. Here's part of it.
In that city, under the leadership of demagogic extremists, Disorderly mobs have deliberately prevented the carrying out of proper orders from a federal court. Local authorities have not eliminated that violent opposition. And under the law, I yesterday issued a proclamation calling upon the mob to disperse.
Yep, that was General, then President Eisenhower, September 1957, sending the 101st Airborne to Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, because the racist governor, Orville Faubus, wouldn't let black students attend a white high school. And every liberal in America applauded. Shoot them! There was one girl in the crowd that day who smirked or scowled at one of the young black ladies being escorted into the school. And she shouldn't have done that. It was cruel, obviously. But it wrecked her life. That picture, which ran the Arkansas Democrat in September of 1957, wrecked her life, actually. She never got out from under that. And that's a measure of how strongly the media, the American establishment, and some of the public were behind the president. Look, it's a Supreme Court order. It's the law of the land. You can't disobey it, or else we have mob rules. Someone's going to rule, okay? It'll either be a dispassionate law that treats everybody equally, or it will be an individual who plays favorites. So your choice really is not between no law and law. That's not a choice. Your choice is between the rule of law or anarchy, which leads to dictatorship. That's your choice. And Eisenhower, in an interesting speech, 13-minute long speech, laid this all out, which is on YouTube. You should check it out. He explained why he did it. Because it wasn't about simply desegregating a high school in Little Rock. It was about upholding the basis of the American judicial system, which is to say the basis of America itself, which is equal application of the law, fairness under the law. It's a nation of laws, not men. And he did that, and it was roundly applauded, and it worked in some ways. Public education was totally destroyed nationally, but whatever. The rule of law was upheld. 5 years later, noting what a popular move this was, apparently, his successor, John F. Kennedy, faced a pretty similar situation at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. It was again September 1962. And there was a lone black student attempting to enroll. His name was James Meredith. He's still alive. He's 92 years old. He's a total right-winger, by the way, which is interesting. But he was trying to enroll, and the school would not accept his application because he was black. And so President Kennedy also sent the military to Ole Miss. How many did he send? President Trump has sent 300 to 500 guardsmen to Chicago, to a city of millions. President Kennedy sent 31,000 U.S. soldiers, U.S. Army soldiers, to a campus of 6,000. Yeah, that's more than 5 armed soldiers per student. 31,000 American troops descended on the campus of Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi at the very end of September, early October 1962, and they shut it down. And they camped on the quad in tents, and they put tanks on the football field, and they put machine gun emplacements on the quad. A couple people were shot to death. And President Kennedy made, now, a bit overkill, in fact, disgusting overkill, in fact, fascist overkill. But the point is he was applauded for it because there was a federal law emanating from a Supreme Court decision, and he was upholding it in the same way that President Trump is currently attempting to, in a much less vigorous way, uphold federal immigration law passed by the United States Congress, which is core to the country. Who lives here is the main question in any country. Who lives there? What is a country? It's the people who live there. And immigration law is the way that you regulate that. So if you don't control that, you're literally not a country. So that's not an optional law. That is a core law. And in the case of Chicago and Portland, but particularly Chicago, shameful. Thousands of people are shot in Chicago every year. Whole parts of Chicago you can't go to. Not if you're like me, you can't. It's so racist and violent, you literally can't walk through parts of a city that you pay for as a federal taxpayer. As an American, you can't walk through it. Several years ago, you'll remember there was a huge debate in Europe. Are there no-go zones in Paris? Are there parts where, native-born Parisians can't go, where they're not welcome? Oh, that's not true. They said that's not true. But of course, whether or not, of course, it was true. But what's even more true is that that's the state of play in the United States and has been for generations. Huge parts of a city, huge. You could walk all day through parts of a city that you actually can't walk through because they're too dangerous for you. And Chicago is particularly disgraceful in its decline. And you don't have to guess about that. I'm going to show you a video in just a second, but you don't have to guess. Look at the numbers. Look at the outflow from Chicago. Are people who are born in Chicago staying in Chicago? No, they're fleeing. Go to Southwest Florida. Go to dinner in Naples some night and ask, anyone here from Illinois? It's half the room. And they're grateful to be gone. That's how dystopian it is on every level, economically primarily. But even on a more basic level, it's just too dangerous. Oh, the freedoms we're losing. Really? What about my freedom to walk to the liquor store at midnight without getting killed? How about my freedom to stop at a red light without getting shot? That's totally real. It's not fake. It's not racist to say that. The mayor of Chicago is an open racist. So irony of ironies, here you have a president sending troops facing down a recalcitrant, racist local official. That does sound like 1962, doesn't it? Except this time, the president in question is not getting accolades from the New York Times. He's being called a dictator! A dictator! But just to set the table here, to lay down the framework for what we're talking about, Chicago, the city. What does Chicago look like? This question is very much like everything else you talk about. Trans surgeries, abortion, whatever the topic is, the people promoting it never want you to see what it actually looks like. Just an idea. It's a right. It's a theoretical concept. No one wants to see what it looks like to cut someone's penis off and create a vagina with a knife. That's what it actually is. Our rights in Chicago, what does Chicago actually look like? Well, here's what it looks like. So what's interesting about those videos is who's participating in the rioting and the violence there. There's the normal assortment of unhappy white young people, make up the bulk of Antifa, make up the bulk of the Democratic Party's activist wing, all the little DSA kids, the children of orthodontists from Great Neck who are, reliving the glories of the 60s or whatever, the weird little polyamorous nihilist freaks who don't see any future for themselves economically, so just burn it down. I mean, very, very familiar to anyone who's watched this stuff over the years. A repulsive group, a dangerous group, a sad group, by the way. You shouldn't have a lot of young people like that in a functioning country. They should be looking forward to a brighter future, getting married, having kids, doing something useful, building something, not just destroying. But they're not. So that is recognizable. We've seen a lot of that over the past 10 years, and we're going to see a lot more going forward, unfortunately, unless someone gets a hold of this now. But what was new in that video were what looked like immigrants, Latin American immigrants. And if we're going to be totally honest about Latin American immigration, most of our immigration up until pretty recently, now it seems all South Asian, but up until very recently, most of our immigration, overwhelming majority of our immigration to this country was from Mexico and the Central American countries, some South America, but mostly Mexico, Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, the usual, Latin America, close by countries in our hemisphere, people taking trains and walking to get here. And the truth is, illegal immigration is bad. Rapid mass migration is always bad because it makes countries crazy and chaotic. But it's also true that our Latin American immigrants are, probably met a million of them, good people, super hard workers. And it's true that they're doing jobs that, you probably did as a kid. And your kids probably aren't doing those jobs because Latin Americans are doing them. I'm saying this if you're white. So I think most people who are very opposed to illegal immigration and very opposed to mass migration, at this point, very opposed to any immigration, which would include me, definitely, are not mad at Latin American immigrants because they're mostly nice people. They're Christian people and they work hard. And there's some drunk driving, but in general, they kind of play by the rules, most of them. The idea that people would get here as immigrants and immediately join a violent street protest, we haven't seen that since about 1905. We haven't. That's shocking. That's scary if that's true. And it's scary for the following reason: the volume, the scale. How many immigrants did we get during the Biden years? Well, no one knows, of course. People pretend they know, but they don't know. Millions and millions and millions and millions. And they're entering a job market that is being destroyed by technology, by AI, quantum computing. So there was no labor market need for these immigrants. It's not like America was just dying for more people to do jobs because we have fewer jobs. And if you don't believe it, if you got college-age kids, ask them if any of their friends are employed in October after graduating. No, they're not, because there are no jobs. So unemployment is going up. Everyone lies about it, but it is. And we just imported, maybe 10 million new people. What are they doing here? What was the purpose of that? How are they living? Well, they're living, of course, on the government. But why? Why did they get here? Why did Biden bring them in? That's a question that no one's answered. And all of a sudden you look at these videos and you see people who are clearly just off the boat or the train, and you start to wonder, maybe we were actually invaded. Maybe our ruling class imported an army and pretended that they were migrants looking for a better life. And maybe we're about to find out what that means. This is really scary because we don't know who lives in this country. We don't know the total population of the country. And again, like the inflation rate, like the unemployment rate, is something that our leaders lie about constantly. But they don't know. They don't know. They don't know how many people live here, and they don't know who they are. Of course, they have biometrics they could find out, but they haven't. Why is that? So if all of a sudden these migrants are participating in street protests where they're throwing bricks through the windows of passing cars, picking up orange cones and throwing them at minivans, you could see this getting completely out of control. And it's a reminder of something that is very often true, which is civil wars become race wars. That is the truth. It's true globally. It was true in Latin America. Lots of the wars in Latin America were really between the Europeans and the indigenous, between the Indians and the Spanish descendants. That's true. It was true in El Salvador. It was true across Latin America. That could happen here. Somebody needs to get this under control before it does, because chaos breeds chaos. It metastasizes. That's true in your home, and it's true in your nation. So getting this stuff under control now before it becomes uncontrollable, before it becomes impossible to drive to San Diego from Miami, is absolutely essential. And the second thing that would be nice along the way is to stop the degradation of the United States, the true degradation. Now, Portland, Oregon is one of the prettiest cities in the world, by the way. Now it's a byword for sadness and death, drug use, and the homeless. But for a very long time, Portland was considered one of the prettiest places ever, a kind of northern San Francisco. Really a really pretty place, charming place, nice people. And in the past 20 years, it's become, thanks again to the influence of a very specific class, professional class, decadent whites, it has become a hellscape. It's true. Under the influence of secular whites, NPR-listening liberals who do not get the credit they deserve for their sinister behavior, their death worship, it has become the kind of place where no normal person would want to go. And it's sad because it is fundamentally so great. Here's a montage of what Portland looks like.
I am smack dab in the middle of a Portland green space. Everywhere you look, trash, paraphernalia, rotting food, and even dead animals. This is the reality of the streets. This is a symptomatic homeless teenager on the streets on meth. For what?
Do you have $2 clear?
No, I don't have clear. This is a symptomatic homeless man who's been talking to himself for about 2 hours downtown Portland. Homeless one behind me has been flashing people the last half hour. Behind me is a senior citizen smoking meth. He's about 72 years old. Homeless man behind me without a shirt just tried to break that window. So nobody is dying in this exact moment, but this right here is the deadliest block in Portland and where I've seen about 20 people die in the last year. Behind me is a homeless woman injecting heroin into her foot. Knotted out in front of a business. Impossible to get into the front door. There's a good 15 people on this block. About 12 are actively smoking fentanyl. 2 people live indoors but come here for the fentanyl. 1 person didn't appear to be using, just kind of hanging out, but overall, good 95% are actively using drugs on this block in Portland.
All native-born whites, of course. A 72-year-old smoking meth. A 72-year-old smoking meth on the street. Who would tolerate that? A cruel person, a truly cruel and evil person would tolerate that. That's not freedom. That's bondage. That's murder. No normal country would tolerate that for one moment. And in real countries, they don't tolerate that. In a downtown, they don't do that. Only in the West do they do that. If we keep this up, we will get Mussolini at least, because it's so unnatural. It is so contrary to the laws of nature. It is so prima facie repulsive and mean to allow this that it cannot continue. And the fact that it has been allowed to continue tells you everything about the people in charge. They're the worst. And what about the citizens? It's not just the leaders. It's the people who live there. A normal person would say, absolutely not. I live as my city. I work here. My kids go to school here. I was born here. You may not do that. We're not going to allow 72-year-olds to smoke meth on the street. What is wrong with you? They wouldn't cede the moral high ground to some creep from another city. All the leaders of these cities are not from those cities. They just show up because they feel a power vacuum. They graduate from Wesleyan or Bowdoin after, running for student body president, just like Mamdani. And they're like, oh, chaos. I think there's opportunity for me. That's exactly the profile. And all the little NGO workers who are passing out crack pipes and needles and tents to the homeless, all of which exacerbates the problems and kills people. None of those people are from any of these cities either. They're all from away. They're all poverty pimps who've shown up to take advantage of human suffering. They're the lowest, posing as the most decent. They're not Clara Barton. They're like Caligula. They're cruel, heartless people who would allow this. And the cruelest and most heartless of all are the generation whose children are on the street smoking meth. They're called the boomers. The boomers. They're not all bad. Not every boomer is terrible. But if you had to identify one generation responsible for the decline and possible destruction of the United States of America, it would be that one. Their fathers returned from liberating Europe and Asia, and they bequeath us this.
This land is my land, from California to New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
They can't even play the mandolin. Mediocre in addition to everything else, a little Ukraine flag. Cliche after cliche after cliche. Not a deep thought. No self-reflection at all, just self-involvement. That's that generation. And if you were there, you would ask them, you wouldn't ask them about ICE or immigrants. You would ask them about the state of their city before the immigrants even got there. Like, why did you allow elderly men to smoke meth on the street, people to die on your sidewalks. They had a dysentery outbreak in Portland, Oregon last year because the sanitation, the so-called homeless camps, was so bad. How could you allow that? Did you notice it? You said you were compassionate. You care about the people of Kyiv. Did you notice the people in downtown Portland were dying on the street? You monster. They're monsters. That level of neglect is monstrous. And the key mistake that normal people make is ceding the moral high ground to people like that, who disguise their hate and indifference to their fellow human beings with the language of compassion. It's a lie. And you know it's a lie because look at the city they made. That needs to be cleaned up immediately. People living on the street, shitting on the street, causing dysentery outbreaks, smoking meth on the sidewalk, having sex in ATM vestibules. These are not manifestations of freedom. These are signs of terminal decline. And they are very serious. They're most serious. This is stage 4. You have to fix that. It's not complicated. You cannot allow that. Because if you do, you send a very clear message to your own citizens, which is, I don't care about you. I don't care whether you live or die, or whether you degrade yourself, whether you live like an animal. If you let your German Shepherd live like that, you would be arrested. But in Portland, Oregon, it's totally fine to let your fellow citizen live like that. If there was ever a reason to send federal troops into a city, it's 72-year-olds smoking meth on the sidewalk. We're shutting this down. We won't have this. Because that person smoking meth is a child of God created by God, and you're killing him, and we're not going to allow it. Someone's going to do that. That will happen. And the opportunity we have right now is to do it in a way that is not totalitarian. But if we don't do it now, we're going to get totalitarianism. Trust me. Nick Sorter has been in Portland, Oregon a lot recently. He just got assaulted there. He's an independent journalist. He has spent the day in Washington, D.C. at the White House at a conference about Antifa, and I think he's joining us now. Nick Sorter, are you there?
I'm here, Tucker. Thank you for having me, sir.
Thanks so much for doing this. So you just came from Portland. How would you assess it? What's it like?
It doesn't feel like America, Tucker, at this point. It feels like, and I know it's a cliche, but it feels like a third world country. I mean, you have police that have been totally infiltrated by a leftist militant group. And, you know, right now you can see police cars behind me. These police cars would protect me if somebody were to come up and assault me. That's not how it works in Portland. The Portland police arrested me instead when I got assaulted. It's a different world out there, and not even just around the ICE facility. Like your monologue was spot on here, Tucker. But you go downtown and it looks like it's post-apocalyptic almost. The graffiti everywhere, the vandalism, the boarded up windows. There are no people in downtown Portland. It's quiet as hell. There's nobody walking around. People don't go there for leisure anymore or for vacation. It's because they're afraid, and they should be afraid. The chance of you getting beat up or stuck with a needle or robbed in the street is through the roof because police there aren't actually allowed to be police.
So what happened to you, if you don't mind explaining? You were arrested for being assaulted? Is that a crime? Is it a crime in Portland to be assaulted?
It's a crime in Portland to be a conservative, Tucker. I mean, as weird as that sounds, the video evidence and even the DA has come out and said because the DA refused to go through with the case, so they ended up dismissing all of the charges. The video very clearly shows me telling the person to back away as I'm walking down the sidewalk. And then the Antifa thugs, you know, this stuff is coordinated, right? They come up with an umbrella to try to block other cameras. And as soon as when they do that, they're gonna commit some sort of act of violence. And that's exactly what they did this time. One of their thugs decided to swing on me and hit me in the face before breaking my camera and then throwing me in a hole. Was that person arrested? Absolutely not. Was I? We know the story now.
What did they charge you with?
Well, they charged me with disorderly conduct too, which is really weird considering the amount of screaming and vandalism and assaults on officers and explosions of fireworks and such that happened in the middle of the night in the streets out there. You know, they but break into cars. If you're not a member of Antifa and you try to drive down that street, they're going to hit your car. They're going to break your windows. There's plenty of videos of that happening, and none of that is apparently disorderly. They call what I did disorderly because it's what I'm doing is a threat to the order in their city, which is basically leftist authoritarianism.
So you got your face in the way of an Antifa fist, and so you're the criminal. Did the
Correct.
cop apologize as he was arresting you? Like what? I mean, it's hard even to imagine the scene you're describing.
Yeah, and so I actually went to this group of police. There are about 12 of them. They're way down the road. They don't do anything ever. Obviously, that situation changed a little bit as time went on. But I went over there to seek refuge with them. To hopefully, like, I wasn't even reporting anybody. I was just standing back, hoping that the situation would get ease up a little bit. And I'm standing there joking with a bunch of them for 7 to 8 minutes or so. And then a sergeant rolls up on a bike and says, cuff him. And and they're like, that guy? This guy right here, cuff him? And he's like, yeah, cuff him. He's under arrest. And they had no idea why. They couldn't explain to me for over 45 minutes, Tucker, what my charges actually were. They started driving to the jail very slowly, hoping that somebody would fill them in on why I was actually being arrested. And so they had to pull over on the side of the road near the jail and just sort of twiddle their thumbs, waiting on a call from a lieutenant. And as soon as they got that call from the lieutenant, that lieutenant instructed the officer to get out of the vehicle, presumably so I couldn't hear what they were talking about on the phone. Something stinks over there. I mean, there were 3 people all night long in Portland that came through that jail. It's the only jail in Portland, and 3 people, including myself, ended up coming through there that night. It's wild.
And there were riots underway.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that same night, my car was vandalized. There were fires in the street. They do that every single night. And nobody is ever arrested for that.
It's so far from the America that you imagine when you think of America. I mean, this is kind of my point. So, for example, like a place, Palm Beach or Miami or Jacksonville, even Tampa, big cities in Florida, that's the opposite of what would happen. And so you wonder, like, how can Portland, Oregon share a flag with Miami, Florida?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as you very well said, this stuff doesn't happen in Florida. It never does. People aren't going to block the roads in Florida,
right?
Because what happens? You're going to get run over because these people will take residents that live right near the ICE facility and box their cars in with people. They'll surround them and terrorize them. But there's nothing that the driver can do about it. If they defend themselves, they go to jail. If they try to drive through the crowd to save their family from these thugs, these violent, mentally ill thugs, they are the ones that get arrested, not the thugs that held them hostage.
So what does that tell you? It tells you that if the rioters don't get arrested, but anyone who resists the rioters get arrested, that tells you that the rioters are, in effect, working for the state. They're the militia then. Right? I mean, what else would that tell you? They're on the same side as the state.
Essentially. Yeah, of course. And then people ask me all the time. It's like, okay, well, are these what are these Antifa folks' thoughts on the Portland police? And there's no ill will between the two groups at all because they're practically working together at this point. Yeah, just the other day there was a business owner or a manager of a restaurant that's at the end of the street where the ICE facility is on. There's only one street to get to that business. And he walks up and begging and pleading with the officers there to open the road, not because the police had closed the road, but because the Portland police had relegated traffic control duties to these Antifa militants that were not letting through employees of the restaurant or patrons of the restaurant, only letting through their own people, and Portland police were letting it happen. Portland police ended up, I have it all on video, I posted it all on my X. Portland police walk up to these militants that are controlling traffic and say, hey, we need you to open up the road. Would you mind opening the road so that people can get to the spaghetti factory? And they said no. And so the road just never opened and police just walked away. I mean, that's how deep this rot runs. Like, who is giving these officers orders to stand down and defer to Antifa?
So you've just changed my mind on this completely. I mean, so I went into this thinking, well, the problem is these groups, Antifa and others, whatever Antifa is, no one's even really ever defined it that I can tell. But these, these groups of radicals angry about something, committing violence against people. But it sounds like the DOJ needs to come in and take control of the Portland Police Department on civil rights grounds. I know they're very busy policing anti-Semitism on Ivy League campuses. It's kind of a critical problem in America. But if a police department is indistinguishable from Antifa, that might even be a bigger problem. And maybe they should take it over tomorrow. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, and that's something that I should probably, I'd like to talk to Attorney General Pam Bondi about. She's been very responsive to this entire situation. She put Harmeet Dillon on it. They've launched an investigation into the practices of the Portland Police Department. And Tucker, we actually put in this demand for discovery after my arrest, and we were demanding all communications between Rose City Antifa, which is an organized group that is an entity that exists, and the Portland Police Department. And literally within an hour of us doing that, my attorney got an angry call from the DA's office, and then eventually said, "Okay, well, you know what? We're not going to move forward with this case." They were clearly bothered by the fact that we were demanding discovery relating to the discussions between Rose City Antifa and the Portland Police Department. So there's something there. There's something there. If we didn't make that demand, I don't think they would have dropped this case.
That's an incredible story. It's not the story I expected to hear from you at all. That's an amazing story. And it's a horrifying story because where does it leave the citizens of Portland? I mean, if the police department is Antifa,
Scared.
Then where do you go?
Yeah, I spoke with a resident. There's an apartment building that is directly, it's adjacent to the ICE facility. And these residents are terrified to speak publicly. I finally got one to speak to me on camera. I haven't released it yet, but he wanted his face blurred because they're terrified of what happens when they walk out of their apartment building, when they're complaining about what's going on in the street and the lack of action on the part of police officers and the city of Portland. The city of Portland, there is a noise ordinance in the city of Portland. People have the right to the quiet enjoyment of their home, right? And the Portland police and the city have selectively decided they're not going to enforce it there, to the detriment of the multiple veterans that live there with PTSD that are hearing the Antifa folks in the street shooting off fireworks in the middle of the night, scaring the crap out of them. They're talking about children in elevators that are crying because it's like a war zone out in front of their house every single day. And the police are just letting it happen. For what reason? I don't know. Is it political? Is it because they're totally infiltrated by these leftists? I mean, there's a lot of reasons that it could be. But it's something that we need to find out because this is not a victimless situation here. The victims are the people of Portland that are just trying to live their lives and go about their daily business without fear of being, beaten in the street for complaining that people want to scream in front of their house at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's how bad it is.
I think a lot of Americans are under the impression that nothing has changed in the last 40 years and the law enforcement and intelligence agencies are fundamentally pro-American and committed to the rule of law. That would include the U.S. military, CIA, NSA, and police departments and National Guard units. You think they're sort of on your side. And I think you're hitting at something that most people don't understand, which is a lot of these organizations, these institutions have been completely taken over by people who sympathize with Antifa. And I would include the U.S. military in that. Many members of the U.S. military cheered the assassination of Charlie Kirk, many online. And that seems like a problem that seems like the problem. Because if things go south, the people with the guns have to be loyal to the Constitution. They can't be loyal to Antifa, right?
Right, and I mean you're absolutely spot on there. It's chilling the amount. Those are just the people that we have that have the weirdly enough have the balls to say that stuff publicly, like condoning the assassination of Charlie Kirk and stuff. I mean, it's terrifying to think of how many of these people are in the background working for these police agencies. Actually, we were able to get a Secret Service agent fired, one that works on protective details, fired for saying that Charlie Kirk had it coming. He said that publicly on Facebook. That's somebody that works on a protective detail. That should terrify everybody, because then it leads back to think, okay, well, did people within the Secret Service just let what happened to Trump and Butler? Did they just let that slide? We know these people exist. We know they're on these protective details. We know that they've infiltrated the military. That's terrifying, and we really need systematic reviews of all of this stuff. And I know down there in Portland, I'm actually here in DC anyway. Here in DC, I will be meeting tomorrow with Harmeet Dillon and the Department of Justice, and they'll be doing a full interview from start to finish on from what happened and what their next steps are going to be. I spoke with President Trump about it today personally. They are not going to let this go. They want to expose all of the rot within this police department out there, because ideally that model will be able to spread to other police agencies across the country. Like what they find in Portland may help them in Chicago, for example. So a can of worms has been opened here. The police chief out there in Oregon or in Portland has been on TV every day slandering me, saying that it is provocative to film in public with a light on your camera, even though it's dark, and so you need a light. I mean, any reasonable human being can figure that part out. But they're terrified. They know that we're not letting this go. And now they got the DOJ on their backs. I'm just hoping that the political pressure keeps up and people don't just forget about the story.
Yeah, I hope not. I know that Harmeet Dillon, who I know very well, my former lawyer, is a really serious and smart person and a very tough person. So I have full confidence in her. But I hope that we don't devolve into like an endless conversation about Antifa and some angry 19-year-old. Yeah, I'm against all that. But cops with guns and handcuffs and the power to arrest citizens, if they're corrupt, boy, there is nothing scarier than that. U.S. military officers, many of whom are like lunatics, like left-wing lunatics. And of course, the foreign policy establishment doesn't care, because all they want is another profitable war, or they want to extend their wars in, Ukraine, et cetera. They want a war with Iran. So they don't really care about whether the people who run the U.S. military are loyal to the Constitution of the United States. They don't care at all, because they're not loyal to the United States. So, but we should care. Right. And I just really hope when you're up there, you'll encourage a forensic look at law enforcement, number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you brought up a really good point that needs to be talked about more, where if there is a way, and I'll definitely ask about this, if there is a way to put more federal power within the Portland Police Department, I don't think it's able to be saved as is. I think it would need to be totally just turned on its head, or maybe scrapped and started over. That would be, I feel like that might be the only way to save it, unless you can take federal control over that stuff. I think that was a really good point that you made, and I'll definitely ask about that. Look, I mean, this is just what we've seen in one city so far. How many more of these cities are having the same issues that we're not talking about? I know Chicago's a hot topic and stuff right now, but I'm sure, is this stuff happening in Seattle? Like, how many other cities are you having this same issue with corrupt political hacks that have arrest powers? I mean, that's very concerning. It should concern everybody.
Wow, that you really changed my mind, Nick, and I appreciate your reporting, and thank you for doing this, and I hope you'll come back.
Thank you for shining the light on this, Tucker.
Thank you. So a few minutes ago, we showed you tape from the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, who's been governor since 2019, I think, running for president. And he compared Donald Trump to Hitler for sending 500 heavy-set National Guardsmen into a city of many millions to restore order in the face of very violent anti-ICE protests. Thought it might be worth getting the perspective of a former Illinois governor, someone who knows a lot about the state and the city of Chicago. He's from the city of Chicago. Former Governor Rob Blagojevich joins us now. Governor, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Tucker. Nice
What
to
do you
talk to you again.
make of Pritzker's position here that 500 National Guardsmen are like the Luftwaffe? This is Nazi America, the Fourth Reich. What do you think of that?
I don't want to malign Governor Pritzker personally, but if anybody resembles a Nazi, it's Pritzker. He resembles Hermann Goering. If you take a look at photos of Goering and J.P. Pritzker.
That is so funny. I was just thinking, I was looking at his hair gel is the way he combs his Brill cream in this way. I was like, who do you remind me of? And you remind me, that's so funny. Excuse me. I agree with you.
Right. Look, if anybody's a Nazi for bringing in the National Guard, J.B. Pritzker should look in the mirror, because only a year ago, he actually brought in the National Guard to protect what? Wealthy, white, limousine liberal Democratic donors and Democratic delegates at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. He was more than happy to do that, but he won't do it when President Trump wants to send the National Guard to help and work with the Chicago police to fight crime in our city, and in a city where every single day at least one person is murdered, in a city where nearly 600 crimes are reported every single day, in a city where 80% of those murders, you see, the crime in Chicago is segregated. You know, the carjackers and the retail thieves and the armed robbers, they go all over the city. But the murders are taking place in the black neighborhoods and in the brown neighborhoods. 80% of the murders in Chicago are in the black neighborhoods or black people. And the other 95% altogether are black people and Latinos. And so the Democrats, like Pritzker, who claim to be on the side of black people and Latinos, are basically saying, we're going to use the National Guard to protect donors, Democratic donors and delegates. But no, we don't want your help, Mr. President, to actually save black lives. Because for those Democrats, notwithstanding their rhetoric, black lives matter only to them for their votes. And what Pritzker's doing now is he's hyper politicizing a very serious issue. He's standing in front of the schoolhouse door like George Wallace did back in '63 when Kennedy federalized the National Guard correctly to allow 2 black students to get into the University of Alabama. Now, Pritzker is sort of a modern day version of George Wallace in some respects, in that he's trying to block President Trump, working to block President Trump and federal law enforcement from coming to Chicago to carry out the mandate the American people gave President Trump in the last election, and that is to secure our borders and to fix the illegal migrant problems. And it's undeniable that there are tens of thousands of criminals who joined the nearly 14 million illegal immigrants that have come to America, according to Pew Research. And estimates are that conservatively 10% of those are criminals. So that means we're talking about over 1 million criminals that have come to America. And what kind of criminals are there? What are they? They are gangsters and they're drug dealers, they're child sex traffickers, they're sex offenders, and they're cold-blooded killers. And it's amazing, and it's mind-boggling to me that J.B. Pritzker would choose this issue, because his motivation is politics. He's playing to the crazy left-wing crowd in the Democrat Party. But it's really offensive and immoral that he would do something like this and stand in the way of actually following the law, because the supremacy clause in our Constitution is very clear. The federal law is supreme over state law, and he should not be resisting or working to resist federal law. So, look, I have a confession to make, Tucker. When I was governor early on, I knew him because he had contributed to Democratic politicians because he was very wealthy, and he asked me to make him director of the Illinois Human Rights Commission. So if I'm going to confess to any crime, because I didn't commit any crimes, but the near criminal thing I did was actually hiring that guy. It was a big mistake.
Did he improve human rights in the state of Illinois?
No, and you know what? I don't know. I worked with him too on the Holocaust Museum in Illinois, in Skokie, Illinois, and at that time he seemed to be a very reasonable guy. But he's changed a lot, I think, and I don't know if it. I don't know what the cause is, other than he's got the desire to run for president, be president, and notwithstanding President Taft and his success to be elected president, JB's never going to be president. I know the guy; he's got no chance.
Taft was in a 3-man race, as you'll recall, in 1912. No, I don't think he has much of a chance. It's interesting. I mean, you've been a governor. There aren't many people who've been governor of anything, and to be governor of Illinois, one of your concerns is population, the state's population, because of course, federal dollars, House seats, they're dependent on how many people live in your state. And Chicagoland, that area, has depopulated. People born in Chicago have left in amazing numbers, very similar to what's happened in California. But the population aggregate number hasn't changed that much because of the inflow from the third world. So it's a little bit like the Catholic Church is always promoting immigration because they need the seats, people in the seats. I wonder if that's part of his motivation. Like Chicago, what percentage of Chicago wasn't born in the United States? Huge.
Well, no, yeah, well, that's right. And the activists in the Democratic Party, there's so many different activist groups in the Democratic Party that push immigration rights and those sorts of issues. And look, I think you would agree. I heard your monologue, and which was profoundly interesting. I mean, most of the people that have come to America illegally, these 14 million that have crashed through our borders because Biden basically said we don't have borders, those are good people, and they're doing the
Yep.
work that you talked about.
I agree.
But see, they're victims, and you know who victimized them? It's these hypocritical Democrats. When they started opening up these sanctuary cities, basically saying, come on in, putting a sign up, come on into America. Don't worry about our immigration laws. Nobody cares. And you can come into our city and we'll protect you. Forget about what the federal law might be, which you don't even know anyway, but it's no big deal to us. Come on in. And so these are well-intentioned, kind-hearted, probably innocent people who want to chase the American dream, like my immigrant father did when he came over here legally after Congress passed the Displaced Persons Act after World War II. They came here looking for an opportunity because they're committed to their families. They want to build a better life.
Yeah.
And that's the great story of America in immigration. The thing that's missing is, but you got to come legally. And they were invited to come here illegally by the Democrats. Biden didn't secure the borders, and the Democrats opened up sanctuary cities, and with all their rhetoric, basically, we're saying all these people come up here. And the reality is, no country can sustain 14 million people who are here unlawfully. And what President Trump is doing is absolutely necessary to save our country. And hopefully, down the road, maybe there can be a way where the two parties can come together and address issues like the Dreamers and these other issues that are very legitimate. But in the meantime, what you have now is a tremendous divide because the Democrats simply refuse to do anything that's good for our country because they never want to give Trump any kind of victory, and they are simply determined to never work with him
But
at
Trump
the expense of our country and the people who live in our country.
Well, I agree with that completely. But Trump didn't write the immigration laws. I mean, they were written by Congress, passed by Congress. He hasn't even signed any immigration law. They have nothing to do with him. They pre-exist his presidency. So he's trying to enforce existing law, and they are abetting breaking that law. So it does seem like insurrection to me. I mean, if a state won't obey like a core federal law, like immigration law, then where does that leave us? Honestly, like how can we share a union?
No, your question's you properly raised. You talked about Civil War, and you think back to the days leading up to our Civil War, and I'd like to think we're not even close to that. But you're right to raise it because you could see how there's this slippery slope that we're going down, and it was the defiance of federal law. Lincoln getting elected, and different states decided we don't want to be under that election with that president, so we're leaving. And before that, they were defying federal law. And we saw what happened. Now you have a situation where not only has President Trump been given a mandate by the American people to do what he's doing, but you also have a situation where we know that it works when there's cooperation. So the success that President Trump has had with the National Guard in Washington, D.C., was in part because the mayor there, Bowser, was willing to accept that and work with him. And they can get into nuances. Oh, well, that's a federal city versus a city like
Right.
Chicago. But if you're the governor of the state of Illinois or the mayor of Chicago, you have an obligation to your citizens to keep them safe. And the National Guard coming into Chicago with all the crime we have and the need to support ICE in its efforts to follow the law and do what's necessary to follow the law, you would think that a governor, irrespective of party, would welcome that support and thank the president and then take credit for the success of protecting American citizens and American taxpayers. But our politics has gotten so crazy, and the Democratic Party is such a crazy party now, with the lunatic fringe becoming the mainstream, and guys who were somewhat reasonable like J.B. Pritzker being transformed. What he's trying to become is basically AOC in drag. Okay, he's trying to like get into her politics as opposed to sort of being the Bill Clinton type Democrat that supposedly he used to be. And the Democrat Party doesn't seem to have room for the Bill Clinton Democrats anymore, or the JFK Democrats anymore. This is a party that's been taken over by that left wing radical fringe that is no longer the radical fringe; it's now the radical mainstream. And it's a socialist, communist kind of party, and it's a party, and our governor again that is basically siding with mob violence and anarchy and chaos over the law, the rule of law, law enforcement, and those who have to enforce the rule of law. And that's what this conflict is now. And that's why it's a seminal moment in our history. And it's why I think President Trump is going to go down probably 150 years from now, because historians can't be objective, as one of our great presidents, because I do believe he's going to be successful in this and solve this problem because he has the law on his side.
I mean, if he doesn't solve it, then we're in for disunion ahead. I mean, I don't see how you can have in a state with no internal, in a country with no internal passports, how you can have some states following immigration law and others ignoring it. It doesn't work. I mean, it just practically doesn't work. So I really hope it can be solved. Do you think in the Democratic Party, which obviously you know a lot about, there are any candidates on the horizon who are reform candidates, like Bill Clinton in '92, like, okay, we went too crazy, we need to pull back a little bit and reorient around America's interests, who even say words like that? Do you see any of those?
I think the nearest thing to that would be Senator Fetterman in Pennsylvania, the guy that wears the hoodie.
Yeah,
He seems to be sensible and willing to find common ground and work and support traditional things that that all Americans have historically been for, what the old Democratic Party used to be for. So I think there is at least one lone voice in that party. I haven't completely written myself off as a Democrat, believe it or not. I mean, I can't begin to tell you. I'm a Trumpocrat. I say that openly, and I'm so proud to be that and grateful to President Trump personally. But frankly, put that aside, I think he's a great president, a necessary president, and he's doing things that must be done to save our country and then make it great again. First, we have to save our country. But no, the hatred and the vitriol on the far left Democrat side is palpable. I live in a neighborhood, that used to vote for me a lot, and I was out on the street the other day, Tucker. I came back from downtown Chicago, and some guy, clearly he was a man, he was muscular, and I think he was a man, muscular, and then he had long hair, but he had a beard, a full beard. But what threw me was he was wearing a dress and combat boots. And he walked by and he took a double take, recognized it was me. Then he gives me the finger. And my first reaction was, okay, a guy like that gives me the finger, I'm going to probably give him an FU or give him the finger back. But then I wasn't sure whether it was a man or a woman, and I'm trying not to swear at women, so I had to hold my tongue. But that's sort of the element that's now a large, loud voice within the Democratic Party. And thank you for the work that you're doing, because I love our country, notwithstanding what my government's done to me. I love my country. I've lived the American dream myself. There's no place like America. And this is the last best hope on earth, as Lincoln said, a true and a great Illinoisan. But thank you for the work that you're doing, because I believe, and I know you do too, that forgotten American, the great, vast, silent majority that Nixon talked about and changed American politics, it still exists. It's what elected Trump last November. People with common sense, believe in God, love our country, don't burn the flag, don't like people who burn the flag, believe in the traditional values of our country. They still make up most of the Americans, and I still believe actually most of rank and file Democratic voters. If those Democrat voters can get over the fact that they've been lifelong Democrats, because it's hard to change your love for your team, they can get over that, and they're increasingly going to leave the Democratic Party, as they're doing, and that Democrat Party is going to increasingly become a party of crazy left-wingers, and whoever gets the nomination, whoever the Republican candidate is against them in 2 years, I think it's going to have a long, hard time to be able to win. I think our country is waking up, and I think President Trump has been at the vanguard of that. And I'm not the only Trumpocrat out there, Democrat for Trump.
You're definitely the most articulate. Rod Blagojevich, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Good to talk to you again, Tucker. Thank you.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.
We've got a new website we hope you will visit. It's called newcommissionnow.com, and it refers to a new 9/11 commission. So we spent months putting together our 9/11 documentary series. And if there's one thing we learned, it's that, in fact, there was foreknowledge of the attacks. People knew.
The American public deserves to know.
We're shocked, actually, to learn that, to have that confirmed, but it's true. The evidence is overwhelming. The CIA, for example, knew the hijackers were here in the United States. They knew they were planning an act of terror.
In his passport is a visa to go to the United States of America.
A foreign national was caught celebrating as the World Trade Center fell and later said he was in New York, quote, to document the event. How did he know there would be an event to document in the first place? Because he had foreknowledge. And maybe most amazingly, somebody, an unknown investor, shorted American Airlines and United Airlines, the companies whose planes the attackers used on 9/11, as well as the banks that were inside the Twin Towers just before the attacks. They made money on the 9/11 attacks because they knew they were coming. Who did that?
You have to look at the evidence.
The US government learned the name of that investor, but never released it. Maybe there's an innocent explanation for all this, but there isn't, actually. And by the way, it doesn't matter whether there is or not. The public deserves to know what the hell that was. How did people know ahead of time, and why was no one ever punished for it? The 9/11 Commission, the original one, was a fraud. It was fake. Its conclusions were written before the investigation. That's true, and it's outrageous. This country needs a new 9/11 Commission, one that actually tells the truth, that tries to get to the bottom of the story. We can't just move on like nothing happened.
9/11 Commission is a cover.
Something did happen. We need to force a new investigation into 9/11 almost 25 years later. Sorry, justice demands it. And if you want that, go to newcommissionnow.com to add your name to our petition. We're not getting paid for this. We're doing this because we really mean it. newcommissionnow.com.
Screens and lights, hidden truths were digital masks. City of the binary nights, awake from the program tasks. Eyes open wide to the glitch in the seams. Patterns crack the mirror cage. Truth isn't what it seems. Find yourself beyond the digital age. Break the matrix, break the mold. Riddles in the code.